this has been an episode that we've been sat on for a good while now. It dates all the way back to E3 this year. The title is very baiting, I admit. The End of Violent Games, but there's a reason for us to name it that. Let's dig into it, shall we? And Impossible Mission to You, so named because it is impossible to talk about video games without getting on somebody's bad side. Impossible, I tell you. Just look at the comment threads. I am Rob, and as ever I have been joined by Prob. Hello there.
Hello.
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. We should have done it a little bit earlier, honestly, because it's, to give it a sort of a catch-all term, which has already been provided, it's Wholesome Games, a group of people who came together to highlight games which have no violence and are a bit more relaxed, and, well, the name kind of says it all, are a bit more wholesome. So we're going to be talking about that growth.
Yeah, I mean, it's a surprisingly massive growth. I mean, we reported on this in News Trash a while ago, and there's been an FT article which has been doing the rounds, and that came out on the 29th of June. For FT, for everyone who doesn't know, is Financial Times.
So a legitimate news source, not like, I know, The Verge or somebody like that.
Yeah.
There's anything wrong with The Verge, just I was picking one at random.
Yeah. But the article has been raising eyebrows and asking questions of the video games industry. And the article is titled, Why Gamers Are Hugging Animals Rather Than Fragging Enemies. And it's a thing that we've noticed in video games for a while now, but we didn't actually have any hard, concrete numbers to kind of gauge just how big this thing is. And by I'm not calling it an issue or anything like that.
No. It's just diversifying.
Yeah.
It's what businesses say all the time. You're diversifying the portfolio. The broader your portfolio, the more options you have to sell products at the end of the day. But before this whole movement came out, let's be honest, games were sort of divided into two fields. There were either explosions and violence or sports.
Not quite. There was a niche. And that niche was there and has always been there for a long time.
That's not what I mean. It's just like, this is the fact that this has been talked about in such a broad way by places is legitimate and respected as Financial Times makes it a mainstream issue. But before it was a mainstream issue, it was very, very niche. And the mainstream was largely explosions, violence, and sports. Yeah. It was only in this last, say, 18 months, really, where this bubble has got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. I think the bubble is always there. It's never had a chance to expand because it's always been crowded out by all of the other games. But it's always been there since the existence of video games. And for people like me who go back through the history of video games, we see it. And we've seen it clearly. If you go back to the early days of adventure games, for example, they are part of this bubble. The wholesome games where it was very much just the adventure. They were, even text adventures.
I'd say yes and no. Those games kind of do fit in the group of being wholesome, but at the same time, the annoyance of the really obscure puzzling is kind of a violence in its own right, I think.
Well, yeah, but that's basically...
that's mental violence.
I wouldn't say that was mental violence. I mean, everybody loves a good puzzle. Who doesn't like a good puzzle?
Millions of people, Rob. It's not that common. It's not uncommon not to like it, but go on.
I'm sorry, but game shows beg to differ. They're just puzzles on TV.
Game shows are different than puzzles. It's trivia, but go on.
Adventure games, and by adventure games, I mean things like King's Quest, Space Quest, The Secret of Monkey Island... those sorts of games where, Secret Monkey Island was notorious for downplaying the whole violence and turning the whole violent aspect into a battle of curses, a battle of insults.
You are in that scene in particular. You are fighting with swords, but that's not the important part of that interaction. It's what you're calling the other person and how you are reacting to it.
Exactly, and so that purposefully played down the violence of it, and for a lot of the game. You don't really have any violence, and it's the same thing throughout the Monkey Island games in general. And you have this trend in video games. Platform games where it's all about the platforming, you don't really have enemies, it's more a puzzle platformer than anything else. They're kind of non-violent. Mario, where you're jumping on animals, is actually kind of a violent game.
Sonic is a violent game. You know?
But
it doesn't sound. It sounds ridiculous to say it out loud because these are sort of primary coloured games targeted towards children. But yes, exactly. They are kind of violent.
Yeah, when you basically look at it under a microscope and start taking it apart, there's violence in a lot of games that we don't think are violent, but there's also non-violence in a lot of games that we just wouldn't expect. You know, because when you think about the modern adventure game, for example, when people think about it, they think about things like The Walking Dead, the Telltale stuff, right? And The Walking Dead being about zombies, you automatically think, oh, there's violence in there. But when you've actually sat down and played the game, the violence is actually not the important thing, is it?
Well, no, but it is still there, but it's sort of in the sort of makeup of an episode or a movie where it's in these little pockets. There's lots of violence, but largely it's just interacting with people and choices.
Exactly. I'm not saying that there won't... I mean, there's some of the titles that were in Wholesome Direct were, you know, I could easily see there being violence of a sort in them. I wouldn't say it would be violent in the same way that Battlefield or Call of Duty or something like that, or Far Cry or... You know,
of course.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was going to be violence of that kind of level, but some kind of interaction, maybe fisticuffs of some kind, would be a part of the game. But the whole point of the game isn't that. The main focus isn't the violence.
Those games, a lot of the games in the Wholesome Direct thing, it was sort of the spirit of adventure, and that's a completely different itch.
Well, there's the spirit of adventure, but I think there was been a rise of social games or society-based games that are about life in general, and we've seen that kind of outside of Wholesome Direct for the last few years with the rise of games like what was it? You know the one? Damn it! Life is Strange. Life is Strange.
Yeah.
The rise of games like Life is Strange. Also, the massive sales for Animal Crossing. Okay.
Yeah, that was obscene, frankly.
Yeah. But also other games like that, Harvest Moon, for example, and games like that have perpetually been there.
Going back even further, you know, there's that trailer, I don't know who's invented it for, and I think it may be Microsoft, for 2 Point Campus, which is an interesting spin, which I never saw coming. But yeah, that goes back to Theme Hospital, Theme Park, Theme... Yeah. Those games are as old as the hills.
Yeah.
Not a bit of violence.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know. SimCity, you know, your city is being attacked by Godzilla. That's a form of violence.
Yeah, but you're not really reacting to that violence. You're sort of managing it after the fact.
Yes. I mean, it's one of the few things from The Big Bang Theory that I thought was actually kind of funny was Sheldon Cooper going, "Oh, the simulated horror," when the simulated Godzilla is attacking my simulated city.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of, I've got a flu, so my brain will just accept anything sort of entertainment.
Yeah.
But go on.
Anyway, ironically, I did watch that episode while I had the flu.
See?
But yeah, anyway, a lot of the games that are on that were on the Wholesome Direct are games that, you know, some of these we actually featured when we were doing our trailer trash specials for E3 this year. There's stuff like Dordogne, which is the one about the woman rediscovering her past, you know, her past childhood at her grandma's place, and things like that.
There's another one, I think it was in the Ludo Narrative Con, that's kind of got a lot of crossover with this too. And a game which I constantly bang on about because I believe that more people need to play this thing, but name fart. What was it called? Swamp Opera.
That's it. It was...
Mutazione. There we go. Mutazione. I'm telling people to play it and I forgot what it's called. That's really embarrassing.
I mean, one of the games that was in the Wholesome Direct is a game that we've actually covered already, The Magnificent Truffle Pigs, which is a slow game.
That's the stigma, isn't it? That is the absolute heart of the stigma of what a wholesome game is. Because games, for a lot of people, are... escapism, and escapism for a lot of people is exhilaration, it's fast pace, it's action, it's tension, it's drama. Go, basically. Blockbuster cinema. And that's not the only way you can escape. For escapism, some people like watching natural programs, nature programs, natural history programs, gardening programs, cookery programs. This is a completely different itch, but it's no less escapist, which is really, really intriguing. It's one of these things, isn't it? Video games are kind of like anime in a lot of ways. It's the most vocal minority or majority, whatever the case may be. And because that is the sort of person who buys games, that is the sort of person who games are made for. Just in the same, that is the same person who interacts with anime, so anime is made for that type of person. But with game events like Wholesome Games, with, I think, news stories, like 60% of people have a hunger for like these sort of games, I think, according to one study.
Yeah.
There doesn't have to be that one thing anymore. But for me, the interesting thing is, will this ever, outside of sort of Animal Crossing, will this ever emerge from the indie space into a bigger budget, more mainstream space?
I think there will. I think the thing is, there are games and then there are games, and when you look at the success of something like Animal Crossing, it kind of it does hint that the market is becoming more and more saturated, has become so saturated with games where violence is the norm or something like that it's going to break open for other things.
Mm-hmm.
I think we saw the same thing happening in the film industry. I think it was towards the end of the 90s, the early noughties, when you started seeing a lot of little indie hits appear and actually making it quite big during the noughties.
Well, yeah, the hunger for that sort of thing was there, yeah.
And because people wanted something different, and it was a sign that the movie industry was reaching a kind of a second stage of maturity or a third stage of maturity, however many times the film industry has matured. But it was reaching another level of maturity because, these things were actually becoming more and more prominent. And I think that's what's happening with the video games industry.
Not quite there yet, but...
Not quite there yet, but, I mean, I will say this.
I love video games.
Yeah.
But my word as an industry is incredibly juvenile.
Yes. I look... The number...
And this, it's kind of growing up a little bit. Just to come back to what you were saying.
Yeah, when we started this episode, we were talking about hard numbers, and it was something like 30% or 33% of the games showcased at E3 were non-violent. A lot of those were accounted for. A lot of those were accounted for by Wholesome Direct, but not all of them. Okay.
I mean, it is the obvious sports aren't violent, so they account for a lot of it too.
I mean, there were 115 non-violent games that were on show, according to the article in the FT. 6 were from Nintendo, 4 from Xbox, 63 came from the Wholesome Games thing, right? Now, that only makes up, 10? So that makes up 73 of 115. That means the remaining 42% came from all the other conferences. Well, I call them conferences.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like the Future Game Show has a lot of them too.
And so that, to me, suggests that there is a rising trend towards non-conformity in video games. Let's call it that.
It's really weird, that, isn't it? Because non-conformity is sort of associated with punk, and when people say punk, they think, rebellious, angry attitude.
Yeah.
But in the video game industry, to be a rebel means to have a nice cup of tea and watch your garden and do some cooking.
Yeah.
It's a backwards situation there.
To be a punk in video games means finding a nice cardigan.
Yeah, it's true. It's a really, really backwards situation, and it's kind of appreciated. So I just want to, this next bit, I just want to say, is there any games out there in the AAA space or whatever space you want to sort of think about that would work with the violence took out?
Oh, that is a good question.
And I also pose this question to everybody listening. Comment below if you think of any games where you'd think, this would work if all the guns or punching or stabbing was removed from it. Comment below.
I mean, could God of War work without the violence? Especially the last one where you just see Kratos
leisurely walk with his dad, Atreus and Kratos going for a walk up a mountain,
and Kratos just getting annoyed with stuff like a grumpy old dad,
shouting "boy" a lot. Yeah, I mean, it could work. It wouldn't be anything like a game. It'd just be sort of a walking simulator, wouldn't it? With them two talking to each other. So yeah, I guess it would work.
It could work.
In a way.
I don't think... I hesitate to call it a game. More of an experience than anything else. But yeah, it could work.
The two which sort of jump out to me, they're kind of the same game, but from different perspectives. Both,
yeah,
whatever. Right, Tomb Raider and Uncharted.
Tomb Raider could work without the violence. Because the old Tomb Raider could.
Essentially talking about games where you're looking for... We go on adventuring and archaeology, and admittedly you'd have to up the puzzling and the platforming.
Well, it depends on which Tomb Raider you played.
Yeah, and not the new ones. The new ones are basically just shit.
I'm not talking about the new ones. I'm talking about the original Tomb Raider games, and it depended on which one you played, because I think it was it Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness was the one that kind of jumped around in time a bit, or the other one, which was about Lara Croft's early childhood. But it was around that time when they thought, the puzzling part of these games is not good enough. Let's increase the amount of puzzles to an annoying level.
But yeah, there's games out there in the world where if you remove the puzzles, no, not the puzzles, that'd be a different story altogether. If you remove the violence, there'd still be a game there, an interesting game.
If you had, let's say, something like, if you look at horror games, for example, something like Fatal Frame, it does have elements of violence in there, but you don't actually fight off anything that you generally can see. You basically have to take photos of them, which is a form of...
You're not really... It's not really violence. It's not really... Like, in that sort of situation, in another survival horror, you'd have a gun and you'd be shooting these things and there'd be going and there'd be blood and gore. But this is just taking photos of things, so you're not... Yeah. It's kind of a... It's a loophole game, isn't it?
It's a loophole game, but then you go to the games where the loophole doesn't exist, and they are completely non-violent horror games. Well, the violence is still there, but not from your side. Your side is basically hide-and-seek games, so things like Haunting Ground.
Yeah, I still think that's violence, though, really, isn't it?
It is violence, but you are running away from it. And things like Yomawari, Night Alone.
Yeah, I haven't really got experience of that one, so I couldn't comment.
Basically, you have to hide in the pools of light from the things that lie in the shadows.
Yeah. That's kind of like the origami game, but that was very violent because it was ninja.
Yeah. Whereas in Yomawari, you're playing a little girl.
Yeah. Okay, so there's... Yeah, comment below. We'd like to hear what you'd think on this, because, there's more games than you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And you can't just pick these out of a hat at random.
Yeah. And there's games in... horror by its nature is going to have violence in it. I'm not saying that you can remove the violence from the horror games. I'm saying that there are different approaches to the violence in horror games, which I actually think is an interesting idea that could be applied to more games.
He's at the core of what this talking point is. It's, for games, a lot of the gameplay loop is how you attack the denizens of the world who are angry and want you gone.
Yeah.
If you remove that, you can't just replace it. You have to replace that void with something.
Yeah.
And I think that is the next, as a gameplay design thing, rather than sort of evolving technology, but as a gameplay design thing, that is the next big evolution for the video game industry, to figure out how to make a game without punching everything.
There already has been a game like that.
Go on.
It already exists, that game. And it was a massive hit for a lot of people. It didn't look the best game, and I'm desperately trying to remember the title of it while I'm talking.
Sneaky.
But it does exist, and it's a game where you have the option of talking to the monsters rather than fighting them.
Undertale.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a big one. In fact, as far as I understand it, that game punishes you for attacking.
Yeah.
By making it stonkingly difficult. Yeah,
because the automatic, the developers were actually quite smart with Undertale.
I think it was a one-man developer, that one.
The actual thought process behind it, I thought, was kind of genius. The idea of punishing a gamer's normal behavior, because normal behavior for gamers is to err on the side of violence.
Yeah.
You see a big monster, you see a monster of any kind, you attack straight away. But you remember, I'm constantly reminded of, remember the original Men in Black?
You're going to be a bit more specific about it, because that's kind of a weird transition you just made.
Right. There's a scene in that original Men in Black where Will Smith's character he's basically going through the interview process to become part of the Men in Black.
Yeah.
And there's the scene where all of them have guns and they're doing the pop-up thing, and there's monsters there and everything like that, and there's a little girl holding these encyclopedias, and that's the only thing, that cardboard cutout of the little girl is the only thing that Will Smith shoots. And it's right at the end, after everyone's fired their weapons. And he explains his thought process. He's like, that guy looks angry, but he's holding a hanky. Obviously, he's going to sneeze. You know, that thing there looks scary, but this is the process. But that little girl, you know, that's like university level physics. Obviously, she's up to something.
Yeah, I remember that. It's an interesting scene.
I'm constant, you know, when I played Undertale, that was actually in the back of my head while I was playing Undertale. I was thinking, that scene from Men in Black obviously had an effect on the guy who developed this game, because
maybe.
I'm not. That's just from my perspective. I'm not saying that is actually the truth, but something of a similar scale. You see what I mean?
Do you think that philosophy is transferable or other stuff? Other types of
games? I think that there are games out there that, and again, if you can think of any, let us know in the comments below, because I do think that there are games out there from the history of video games that currently they will have violence in them, but you could easily remove the violence and maybe the game will improve. Maybe it won't be the same game anymore. It'll be a completely different type of game, but it's a game that doesn't necessarily need the violence in it. It's like the policy I have towards fan service in anime. If it's necessary, fine. If it's a necessity, fine. But more often than not, it does not need to be there. It doesn't add anything to the story. It is just there to sell merchandise.
Yeah, lewd, disgusting merchandise.
Yeah, and more often than not, that's what's happening. It's sad to see that the video games industry hasn't quite had that self-realization moment where they kind of go, we don't need to do it this way.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what that comes. But before I launch into this last point, looking at maybe what the future holds, please do consider liking, subscribing, sharing us with your friends. Okay, so final point. Upcoming games which aren't violent that you are looking forward to. I'm going to jump in first and let you think, because I thought of this game before I even asked the question, so I've got a bit of an advantage on you. And it is Harold Halibut, which featured on the Future Games show. And besides this art direction being sort of handmade, sort of clear animation, stop animation stuff like Wallace and Gromit, like this and that. It's just the style. It seems like a sleuthing adventure in space. And to go back to a game which does have violence, I really loved Judgment because of the detective narrative, not because of the punching. Well,
Judgment is a game where you could actually take the violence out, and it would just be. I think it'd be quite a strong game, from the sleuthing side of things.
It's sort of like be in line with those Sherlock Holmes games that they've done a few of, but a bit better maybe. But Harold Halibut is one which has really sort of ticked my box, and I'm really, really looking forward to that. But they keep on being very coy and saying it's coming soon-ish.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because it's stop motion and they're animating everything by hand.
Well, initially they made the sets and the characters, but they are making it through the engine of the game. But it's still not like as easy as a traditional engine for a game that exists within.
For me, one of the ones that I've been keeping my eye on for a while now, and when we're doing our coverage of the trailers of E3, I did mention this one as one that I have been keeping my eyes on for a while. It's Book of Travels, and I like the idea of Book of Travels. I like the whole concept of Book of Travels. I think that it's one of those things where exploring the world. One of the things I love doing in a game is exploring the world. I played Eve Online for a while, and I refused to play the game the way everyone else was playing it because I just wanted to see what was out there. And so I chose to become a scavenger. I chose to basically to salvage old wrecks in space and just go off and do my own thing. And that was how I played the game. I wanted to play it that way, and the game allowed me to do that. And I've been constantly looking for a game that would allow me that kind of freedom. I have found it in certain games.
No Man's Sky is probably the closest you're going to get to that, really.
Well, I mean, there are games that are like No Man's Sky. Elite Dangerous has a large degree of freedom. The Star Citizen whenever it appears.
Yeah. So never.
Whenever Star Citizen comes out, we're hoping it might give us that. People are saying that Starfield is going to have that kind of freedom. I'm like, yeah, really?
I'd hope so, but given like Bethesda's recent history, no, it's not gonna.
Given what Bethesda did with Fallout and how very different Fallout became after Bethesda bought it, from the amount of freedom Fallout 1 and 2 had to the very linear, very narrow, very pro-American gameplay that it had in Fallout 3, I doubt it.
Yeah, but you had that Beautiful Desolation recently, which is kind of a callback to that sort of thing.
Yeah, it is. But yeah, I like games where I can just explore the world with other people or by myself. And Book of Travels is one of those ones. I mean, the painterly style of the landscape and the characters, I really like that.
But yeah, I just like a good mystery for me. But yeah, that's all we have time for in this episode. Comment below with anything that you have to add on any of the things that we brought up. What is your favourite game with no violence in? Comment below. We'd love to hear from you on that. And please do subscribe and click that notification bell. The social media connections are up on the top of the screen. We also have a Patreon. And every weekend, Graham will have 2 articles for all you Doctor Who fans. He does a deep dive with a random number generator, which sounds very leading and suggestive. But there we go. Some of the people on the screen now are Patreons. If you join them, your name too will go up on the screen, and we thank each and every one of you. Fantastic, generous people. Until next time, this has been Impossible Mission. We have been The Geek Show, and thanks for watching.